Dual sports are the quintessential jack of all trades. If you want a bike that can do a little bit of everything off-road, these are the bikes to get. Now, I've selected these 7 bikes because they offer the most versatility for their engine capacity, both new and used. Whether it's traveling the world, commuting, weekend camping, or doing goat trails, these 7 bikes are the best in the business at what they do. Let's start with the tiny tots. I've chosen the Honda CT125 Trail as the new option, and the older option is also the CTs like the CT90 and the CT110, which preceded the 125. And I feel like tiny dual sports don't often get the recognition they deserve. It's not about the size, but how you use it. At least that's what I tell myself as I cry myself to sleep every night.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
So what are we looking at spec-wise with a CT125 Trail? Well, it's dead simple. Air-cooled single, 9.5 horsepower, 125 cc's of roaring power, 117 kilos or 259 pounds, and a bum-scraping seat height of 800 millimeters. So even the shorties out there will easily get their feet down on this little wee beastie. Now sure, these little things can't hold highway speeds to save their life, and you're not going to impress your mates with the power figures. But what these little bikes do offer is so much more than big numbers. These are legendary little bikes, particularly here in Australia, where we often refer to them as postie bikes, as Australia Post have been using them for years to survive our terrible, rough country roads. These bikes have been used to get us to uni, commute to work on the smell of an oily rag, and travel the world. Reliable, cheap to own and run, and infinitely moddable, and with the right attitude, you can tackle just about anything. Now, the appeal of riding one of these isn't, like I said, about its highway capacity or big power. The joy of riding this wee beastie is the headspace that it puts you in. No longer are you trying to wrestle a giant pig of an adventure bike, desperately trying to manage 100 plus horsepower while sweating your balls off in your latte covered adventure jacket. Instead, these little bikes let you sit back and enjoy the ride at a leisurely pace, taking in your surroundings and allowing you to take that little trail with confidence. Because they're so light and manageable, it means almost every situation is easy to get out of by yourself. And the icing on the cake is just how cheap these bikes are to keep on the road and how simple they are. They're very easy to fix. Even a one-armed chimp with a learning disability can fix one of these because they are that simple. And that really has made them one of the go-to bikes for people going around the world, because their parts are so easy to get hold of, the bikes are so simple, and you can get through basically any situation on one of these. A lot of people choose these to travel the world. I only think of Ed March and these C90 adventures as a perfect example. Best used 250 dual sport has to be the Yamaha WR250R. Having owned one, I hold a lot of love for this little whizzer. What are the specs? You're getting 29 horsepower at a stratospheric 10,000 RPM, 23.7 Newton meters at 8,000 RPM. Importantly, that 6-speed gearbox with a decent spread so it can do highway and the tight stuff off-road. 134 kilos or 295 pounds. Quite light for a dual sport. Ground clearance very decent, 300 millimeters or 11.8 inches. Importantly, it's built in Japan, so the build quality is just top notch. Adjustable suspension, which is a rarity for this class. A lightweight aluminium semi-double cradle frame, which was derived from the YZ series motocross bikes and the WR250Fs, so it had proper off-road heritage. The only downside for the shorter people is a seat height of 930 millimeters or 36.6 inches. So what makes the 250R a better choice over the other used 250s on the market? Well, the WR offers a 250 that can actually hold highway speeds pretty comfortably, and it's light enough to tackle any trail you come across at the same time. The goat trails that the Orange boys play on, you can hack down those on your WR250R. This makes a great lightweight adventure option. It can hold its own out on the big roads, and it can go places the GS just can't off-road. Factor in that adjustable suspension suspension, which is rare for the 250 class, and you have one of the best dual sport packages out there. It is a very capable bike, but you need to be warned that it does have one flaw. It loves to rev and bounce off the limiter. That is where the motor is the happiest. So if you're the kind of guy that really enjoys low-end torquey bikes, that tractor factor, this might not be the bike for you. And it's a crying shame that Yamaha discontinued this fantastic little dual sport.
Start it up.
Of course, I'm going to be putting the CRF300L at the top of the list here. Collectively, you can all roll your eyes, and if you don't know, this is the bike I currently own. But I'll try and be as objective as possible, but you need to factor in the potential for rose-colored glasses here. So what are the specs? We're looking at 27 horsepower, 26.6 newton meters of torque, a well-spread 6-speed gearbox that's probably the best 6-speed I've been on for a dual sport, with enough power to hold the highway speeds, but the lower gears are close enough to really be usable off-road. 142 or 144 kilos or 309 pounds. Ground clearance is 280 millimeters or 11.2 inches. Non-adjustable suspension except for preload at the rear. It's made in Thailand with a seat height of 880 millimeters or 36.6 inches. And Honda has you covered if you're a shorty, because you have the LS model, which is the low model. It's 825 millimeters or 32.7 inches. In my opinion, this is the top of the pile now that the WR has been discontinued. And it's about as close to a mid-sized modern dual sport as you can get at the moment. It has a little extra grunt thanks to that bigger motor, which is very welcome and makes it a bit peppier through traffic and on the highway than a 250, and has more of that torquey tractor factor. So there has a lot of little things, that little bit of extra cc's over the WR250R, that really make it great as a dual sport. The switchable ABS is also a real advantage and makes it safe, and it's super simple to turn off with a click of one button. It's light enough to pick up yourself if you're out in the middle of nowhere, while still being composed and smooth, which is not something you often get with a dual sport. It's one of those rare dual sports like the WR250R, which you can actually arrive to your destination with your fillings still in your teeth. Now, in comparison to the WR, people are going to point out that the WR has a higher peak horsepower and a lower weight, and both of those are true, but having owned both, the power actually comes in earlier for the Honda, and the Honda has more torque. And with such small motorcycles, that little extra torque is hugely noticeable and available earlier in the rev range. And you don't need to gear this bike down when you load it up with gear, because it has enough grunt to do so by itself. As to the weight, Honda have always been very good at hiding the weight on the 250L and on this 300L. Because it's got a lower center of gravity than the WR250R, I can't tell the difference, and this bike is just as easy, if not a little easier to pick up than the WR, because the weight is down lower. Now, the biggest flaw that I would like to point out on this bike is the suspension. The suspension really isn't up to the task of an intermediate and above rider. If you're a beginner, it's going to be perfect. This is what that bike was made for. But if you got a little bit more skill and you're wanting to turn up the heat, you're going to need to address the suspension. So be warned, the suspension is on the soft side. But what I will say to the intermediate and above riders is, if you have the patience to upgrade the suspension, it is well worth it, because it really unlocks the capability of this little unicorn. Another bike on the list I've personally owned. I know I've got a serious habit, leave me alone. What's left to say about the DRZ that hasn't already been said? If you're after a true mid-size 400cc dual sport that's light and reliable, then the DRZ really is the only game in town. With plenty of power, every accessory under the sun available, it can be a great platform for your dual sport journey. Spec-wise, we're looking at almost 40 horsepower at 8,500 RPM, 39 newton meters of torque, 5-speed gearbox, 138 kilos or 304 pounds, ground clearance of 300 millimeters or 11.8 inches. This bike is made in Japan and has a fairly tall seat height at 945 millimeters or 37.2 inches. I am quoting the E model here in Australia if you're wondering. The DRZ has been on sale for 20 years at this point, which means you can find plenty of these things on the used market with all the accessories you can imagine. Although they are getting a little pricey in Europe, the best best way I can sum up the DRZ is if you want enduro power and performance with dual sport durability and service intervals, the DRZ is basically that bike. What the DRZ does well is simplicity, reliability, it's dead easy to work on, and it does make decent amounts of power. And the lack of technology is also one of the reasons why people love this bike so much, because it's unmolested by the modern tech. It's just a pure riding experience. So what are the drawbacks with this bike? Well, not everyone's going to love the 5-speed gearbox because it's never going to be as accomplished, particularly out on the open road. As a good, well-spread 6-speed. The other thing is this bike can get a bit loud, so if you don't like noisy bikes, then this probably isn't the one for you. If you love working on your bike, you want simple, reliable, with decent power, and you don't want electronics getting in the way of your experience, it really is hard to look past the DRZ400. But bloody hell, Suzuki, hurry up and make an updated model with EFI and 6 speeds. You would have back orders to the damn moon for the thing.
Shut up and take my money!
Next, we have the new mid-size dual sport, which unfortunately just doesn't exist in today's market, which is super frustrating. So I've had to get a little bit creative with a bike to recommend you. And the closest thing I think to a mid-size dual sport on the market today is the Honda WR250R. But Honda has brought this bike as close as you can to a dual sport while still retaining that enduro performance, which is exactly what the doctor ordered for some of us with higher skill sets but still want dual sport features. It's probably the most versatile enduro we have, and that's why I'm listing it here. So what are the specs? We're looking at 42 horsepower and 32 newton meters of torque, a 6-speed gearbox which is well spread, especially for an enduro, and yes, I have ridden one. I can tell you it's quite good out on the open road for what it is. 132 kilos or 291 pounds, a ground clearance of 315 millimeters or 12.4 inches, a seat height of 940 millimeters. This is built in Japan, high quality, and importantly, it has fully adjustable shower suspension, which is a real feature that just you don't see on dual sports. Having ridden this bike, the best way I can summarize this motorcycle is it's the modern reimagining of a DRZ400E. That's the enduro version of the DRZ, which was kind of this bike 20 years ago. So why did this bike make the list? Well, that 6-speed gearbox really allows you to have quite a decent experience both off-road and on-road with the way it is spread out. The power as well. For people that really want performance out of their motorcycle, that 42 horsepower is going to be exactly what you need and going to be plenty happy for you to lift the wheel, get a big grin on your face, and do the silly stuff that you want to do. The premium suspension is also something you cannot disregard. I always reach a point where dual sport suspension starts holding you back. The weight is also really appealing. This is the lightest bike on the list if you exclude the CT125s. But like all bikes, it's not perfect. The big one that stands out is the 1,000 kilometer service intervals. Having an enduro motorcycle engine, it does come with its downsides, and that means regular service intervals. So multi-day trips, you're going to be having to take some oil with you, which is an absolute deal breaker for a lot of people. If you are brave enough, you can push those out. There's lots of documented experiences of people doing this online. The other major one is the throttle response in the lower gears, particularly first gear. The 450RL cuts the revs off abruptly when you back off the throttle, and it causes a few issues. First, it can make it surge when you're trying to hold a steady speed in those lower gears, and secondly, it also makes it easier to stall. The fix, of course, is to get an upgraded ECU, a power commander, a Vortex ECU. You can add a throttle tamer to try and help tame that throttle response as well. So maybe check what your idle's sitting out, bump it up, test how you go. In summary, if you want a bike that can hang with the KTMs but has some concessions to road comfort, you can get to the trail without a trailer, the 450L is a great option. It's a crying shame that Honda didn't stretch out the oil changes, because that would have made this bike a home run. Still, for those willing to push the intervals, this is quite the ultralight dual sport with performance and quality components most dual sport riders can only dream about, and that makes it a very versatile enduro and ultralight dual sport motorcycle. The original Big Pig, the DR650, which has been around forever and is basically unkillable at this point. The DR is a great option because of the motor, and it's relatively lightweight for the motor size. The specs are this: 43 to 46 horsepower at 6,400 RPM depending which spec sheet you read, and 49 to 53 Newton meters at 4,600 RPM. 5-speed gearbox, 166 kilos or 366 pounds, a seat height of 885 millimeters or 34.8 inches, which can be lowered, and a ground clearance of 266 millimeters or 10.5 inches, and importantly, made in Japan. Not everyone wants to brave the freeways on a small capacity dual sport, and the DR offers enough grunt for any speed limit. This opens up the bike to being a very good lightweight adventure bike. Slap on a big tank, a screen and a comfy seat, and you have yourself a long distance dual sport that can go places you wouldn't dream of taking your flagship adventure bike. Now yes, the big pig is not going to glide through the goat trails like the smaller contemporaries, but with some determination it can get the job done. The DR650 has been out so long that, like the DRZ, all the little niggles on this bike have been well documented and are very easy to fix, but safe to say for the most part this is an extremely reliable and simple motorcycle. And if I was to say one thing about this bike that really sets it apart as a versatile motorcycle compared to all the others here, is this is the dual sport that you get if you're wanting value for money but you're still wanting some adventure bike characteristics, particularly the power and performance. And that's what the DR650 offers. It's a compromise between a dual sport and an adventure bike in my head, because it really can be brought quite close to an adventure bike with the right modifications, and that's why it has so much appeal to so many people, and that torque is just so addictive. Now we come to the big bore new, and of course we have to list the KTM 690/701/ES700. They're all the same damn bike with some minor tweaks. So what are the specs? We've got 74 horsepower, 6 speeds, 159 kilos wet or 350 pounds, WP fully adjustable suspension, a ground clearance of 270 millimeters or 10.6 inches, a seat height of 910 millimeters or 35.8 inches, and as far as I'm aware, it's still built in Austria. If you look at affordable, value-orientated dual sports and it makes you sick, or if you've got scoliosis from your fat wallet, the KTM is the answer to your woes. Jokes aside, if you want big power out of your single cylinder and suspension setup for hard riding, this is your best option. Not exactly beginner friendly on the trails with that 74 horsepower and that hard suspension setup for spirited riding, but if you've been riding a while and you want a versatile, high performance dual sport, then the Pumpkin might be a winner. And if you dive into the Rally Raid catalog, this bike can be absolutely turned into a world crunching weapon. Now with the KTM, you're always going to have in the back of your head a little bit of a worry with reliability, but the 690 has been out for a decent amount of time and KTM have been very good at addressing the issues that have popped up. But you should be doing your due diligence with any bike you're looking to purchase. If you want a true premium dual sport with high performance, the KTM 690 is the only game in town. The biggest issue for a lot of people with the 690 is going to come down to the price at double the cost of a lot of the bikes on this list. Ultimately, if you want adventure bike power with dual sport weight, the KTM is definitely worth your attention, with the ability to do massive adventure trips in comfort because of that massive amount of power for a single cylinder, while still being capable enough to do the goat trails when you want. And there's not many dual sports that can claim to be legitimately quick motorcycles, particularly on the open road. And that's the 690's secret superpower, because often when I've got a dual sport, it doesn't really make a lot of power, so I usually get a second bike for the road so I can still get my enjoyment and my thrills. But with the 690, it makes enough power to serve both purposes, in the fact that you don't really need a road motorcycle for those thrills because the 690 makes enough power. And I would slide the DR650 into that category as well. So that's my list of the top 7 most versatile dual sports on the market. I'd love to know yours. Is it different? Is it the same? Let me know in the comment section down below. Until next time, don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll see you in the next one.